Excellent. I was. Okay, y'all, this morning is a beautiful Lord's Day. Our people have been working tirelessly for weeks to get this speaker. The man is a legend. In 1975, Andy Gothard, Andy, if you'd stand up, please. Andy was on Bear Bryant's national championship team. Now, the story goes with that. But he also coached the defensive backs in 77, 78, and 79. Led them to 2 championships. But the big deal in his life is somehow this man was able to convince the lovely, the charming, the beautiful, the talented, the saintly Denise Crawley to marry him. And now she goes by Denise Crawley Gothard. Did Denise come today? There she is. Okay. Now, many times it's a surprise because many times the speakers' wives do not come. The other thing that's unique about this family is Andy, being a stalwart Alabama fan, as you might imagine, has a wife who is a stalwart Auburn fan. What's that? He outkicked his coverage. That is true. That is very true, I'm sure. This man, besides finishing at the University of Alabama in business, also got a law degree at the University of Alabama and went to Emory and got a master's in tax law. But the significant thing about him was in 1975, Alabama-Tennessee game, ABC televised coverage. Alabama was behind. It was before the half. Tennessee then kicked a punt. Unfortunately, the punt bounced, and some say hit Andy in the rear end, okay, which would mean the ball would go to the other team. And this was the first of the instant replay days, so they showed that on TV about 75 times, gave the ball to Tennessee, they scored, and then later Alabama came back to win, but it was not Andy's greatest day. But since then, he owned a hotel in Panama City, sold it in about 2004, but you will not believe this, created an algorithm for stock trading. Some say that Andy is the reason for the crash of 2008. Please help me, a man that has definitely outkicked his coverage, our own Andy Gothard.
Thank you. Thank you, Russ. Okay. Happy Father's Day to everybody. And listen, I'm well aware that we want to beat the Baptists, the Methodists, and the Presbyterians to lunch so we don't have to stand in line. So I'm going to be quick today. I had an interesting week, and of course they introduced my wife, but this is my cousin Nita. And we had an occasion to be together this week, and she got me to thinking, and I just love Nita. But we're different politically. So today, I'm going to try to do something in 15 minutes, and it's going to be a major miracle if this happens. I'm going to try to combine sports, religion, and politics, and see if I can talk to somebody about it today. Yesterday, how many saw the U.S. Open and saw Phil Mickelson shot? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Phil Mickelson, a famous golfer, yesterday had a 6-foot putt. And that 6-foot putt, he hit it, and he missed the putt. And unfortunately for Phil, the ball was going to roll another 100 feet because of the slope of the green. And he lost his temper, and he lost his cool. And while the ball was rolling, he went up and took his putter and swatted it back. Now, obviously, he incurred the 2-stroke penalty. But nonetheless, he lost a little of his temper. And unfortunately, when Denise and I got married, we had to do counseling here at the church in order to get married here at the church. And we had these tests where you would say, okay, how are you like and how are you different? And the pastor at the time, no, it was Rick Coffo. Rick said, I've never seen 2 more people more compatible in my life based upon the results of these tests. And he said, but there's one glaring difference. And on the one question it says, do you think your spouse has a temper? And one was, the number one was no, and number 5 was heck yes. And so I put 1, and my wife put 5. And so I'm known for having a temper. But anyway, I kind of got a little irritated by the latest campaign here in the state. And Anita and I were talking about it this week. And everywhere you turn, and every time you turn on the TV, the first thing on any commercial is conservative Christian values. You see it, you just see it everywhere. And so I said, so do people, these candidates that are really talking about conservative Christian values, do they actually have Christian values? Well, I'm going to try to tackle that in the next 15 minutes. And the issues that where I tried to decipher whether they have Christian values or non-Christian values is debt, is money. It's money. Today in this country, we have a $21 trillion debt. And if you add, and that works out to $160,000 per taxpayer. If you count the unfunded liabilities of each taxpayer's responsible for, that debt goes from $160,000 to $400,000. $400,000. If you add total federal, state, corporate, and personal debt, that totals $67 trillion. So I said, okay, tell me what the Christian values are in the Bible as to debt. Deuteronomy 28:1, you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not be a borrower. That's taken in the context of being obedient to Christ. Proverbs 22:7, the borrower is a slave to the lender. Romans 13:8, owe no one anything. Deuteronomy 15:1 through 23 talks about debt cancellation every 7 years. If these are Christian values, then why have good men and good women allowed our federal debt to get to $21 trillion? Found in Proverbs, the 14th chapter, the 12th verse, and this is what it says. It says, there is a way that seems right to man, but in the end, there are ways to death, ways of death. As another Christian values commercial states, you have to know where you've been in order to know where you're going. So I thought I'd take just a few minutes to tell you where we've been in this country. Politics is nothing but a fight over someone else's money. Here's a brief history of our country's fight over money. The world started, and up until the Civil War, we were an agricultural society. Interestingly enough, the federal government had as its sole source of income tariffs, and you hear about tariffs all the time today. The dollars that were issued were backed by gold. In those days, the amount of gold was equal to the same amount of dollars in circulation. That was commonly known as the gold standard. Any individual could choose between dollars or gold when they received, when they were due money for goods or services. You could go into a bank and get gold, or you could go in the bank to get $1. But you could get either one. The collateral was behind the dollar. And then during the Civil War, that remained the same case. The dollar was backed by gold. But a new currency was issued by the northern states called the greenback. And it was a dollar not backed by gold at the time. And that is the first time that had happened in our country. From the time of Civil War through 1900, known as the Industrial Revolution or the Gilded Age, railroads were the big invention of the time. Rockefeller grew the oil industry. Vanderbilt's grew the roads. Carnegie grew steel. And J.P. Morgan got Europeans to finance these industries. These 35 years unquestionably marked the greatest expansion of wealth in the history of this country. However, capitalism created two problems. It created economic cycles, and it created income inequality. At that time, political parties pitted the workers against the owners. Then the pivotal moment came, and one of the pivotal moments came in our country. And that occurred between 1893 and 1896, when the U.S. suffered a Great Depression. The Depression started in Europe, and because the European investors in the United States wanted to take their money back to Europe, they took it back in the form of gold. When our gold reserves decreased, that meant our dollars decreased. And as such, it created a strain on the Treasury. And in February of 1985, for all intents and purposes, the U.S. government was bankrupt. And the way it kept from bankruptcy was a fellow named J.P. Morgan personally loaned the U.S. Treasury enough gold to get around the gold standard requirement. During that time, the Democratic candidate for president was a guy named William Jennings Bryan, who advocated the silver as part of the collateral behind the dollar. In other words, you had gold. Now you're advocating silver, which could, in essence, grow the money supply. An expanded money supply and an expanded government was the solution for income inequality. And then in 1913, the Federal Reserve was established to, in essence, prevent the economic cycles caused by capitalism. So in 1929, obviously everybody knows that Wall Street crashed, and the Federal Reserve that was established to handle these economic downturns and these economic cycles did the wrong thing. They decreased money supply, which in essence caused the Great Depression. And then in April of 35, the second pivotal moment in our country's history, Franklin Roosevelt declared that it was illegal for an individual to own gold. For all intents and purposes, the gold standard was over at that time. If you can't own gold and can't have gold, there's no reason to have gold as collateral. And so, but there was something that I want to stress here, and this is kind of the point that my lesson's going to be about, is that overnight, the dollar was worth 60% less. The buying power of every individual in the country dropped 60% overnight. And that can be called our first currency crisis that this country has seen. The fight over money continues today, but with Roosevelt's New Deal and LBJ's Great Society, government expanded at a record pace. It expanded on the promise of creating a more equal society. Programs such as Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment compensation, all of these expanded the growth, was facilitated by an expanded money supply since we were no longer on the gold standard. It is clear that the Federal Reserve, which was established to prevent economic downturns, has not done a very good job of that. We have had severe economic downturns in 29, 33, 54, 73, 87, 92, 2001, and 2008. However, the Federal Reserve has accomplished the growth of government and the growth of debt. If you were to have a pie today, and that pie equals 100% of our expenditures, 28% of that pie is Social Security. 22% is Medicare and Medicaid. And here's the Christian conservative values point, and here it is. The next biggest item in our budget, 21%, is net interest on our debt. That's 71% of the 100% that cannot be touched, fixed. 71% of our budget is locked. So, the question must be answered. As a society, what did we get for our $21 trillion in debt? Here's what we got. The average person has less than $400 in their bank account for an emergency. The average person is now more in debt than they were 30 years ago. And Forbes magazine says this is the #1 indicator of a society. And I was shocked to read this, but my wife has heard me say this. The #1 indicator of a healthy society is the age of the average automobile that's on the street. Anybody want to guess what the average age of an average automobile is on the street today? 14. 14 years of age, the average age of an automobile on the streets of this country. So, let me get back real quick and then I'm going to finish. So, we're basically, per taxpayer, $400,000 in debt. And my question is, just a show of hands, how many people think you're going to have to pay back that $400,000? You want me to tell you how you're going to pay it back? That's a great question. Basically, it's to society, because what's coming is the following. The way you're going to pay this debt back is we're going to have to inflate our economy. The economic fact of life is that the way you repay debt is to inflate the economy, which makes the debt less. So, price of housing, the price of cars, the price of everything is going to rise. Second thing that's going to happen, the way we're going to repay it, is the dollar is going to be devalued. Okay? In other words, your dollar is not going to buy as much. The third way you're going to pay it back is through generational theft. You're going to make the young people pay for what the old people get. Just look at all the programs that are out there. The young people pick the tab up. And then finally, your standard of living is going to decrease. It is a mathematical certainty that one day this is going to happen. And here's why. We're running a $1 trillion deficit per year. And there is zero chance that that will be corrected at the ballot box. That's the fight over money. Now, the fight's going to be settled one day, but that's the way it's going to be settled. So, and I want to explain how this is going to happen, because it's coming, and here it is. Somewhere overseas, whether in Europe, whether some other undeveloped country, their currency is going to drop versus the dollar. It's going to drop. And the move that the governments make when a currency drops is to raise interest rates. That's how you protect your currency. And once you raise interest rates, then that kills the economy. It's a never-ending cycle. And so far, the United States has been the bastion of safety. In other words, when there's a crisis, the currency flows to the United States. What happens when the crisis is the United States? So, anyway, all right, I'm gonna get to it. I'm gonna get to it. That's exactly right. And here it is. And here it is. Our politicians that claim to have these Christian values, that keep continually voting for budgets that run deficits. We now have hope that after this happens, we now have hope that we can understand what caused it and to have a vote accordingly to have a fiscal budget that does what we want this country to be. And that is where a person can work and make a decent living and pay his bills, feel some pride about themselves, and can look at his fellow neighbor without envy or disgust, where we can be treated in a way that we want to be treated and not be conned by somebody saying that they believe in God. That's the hope. That's the hope. So let me just say this. Years ago, your mom and dad taught you two things: how to be a gentleman or a lady, and that there was no such thing as a free. Okay. Well, they were right. There's no such thing for a free lunch, and there better not be a free lunch other than for Dad in the next 15 minutes. Thank you very much. I enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you.